as a counsellor in schools for the charity CXK, and April is National Stress Awareness Month, so I'm going to have a quick conversation with you about stress. So starters, what is stress? Stress is that rising sense of tension, frustration, maybe anger that we normally feel in response to challenging circumstances, particularly when maybe expectations and demands upon us feel maybe quite unrealistic, unachievable, or maybe even a little bit unfair. So often we experience stress when there's a collision of competing priorities. I think if it was one certain thing in front of us, it might be a little bit easier, but when there are lots of different things that are needing our attention, our time and our energy, we may feel particularly stressed. Or if we're in a position where we feel that there is no easy solution, again, we may feel particularly stressed. And we might see a real difference between the external demands upon us and our internal needs as well, and it might be a real juggling act knowing how to find a successful way of meeting the needs of everything in front of us. So we really may feel that there's no way forward. We may feel particularly quite stuck. And so that doesn't feel good. It feels tense, it feels frustrating, it can feel quite hopeless at times. And that feeling, that psychological feeling, is designed to provoke us to take action. So actually that discomfort that we feel is our bodies responding appropriately to help push us to make changes to kind of settle our external environment. So for example, if we're cold, we might put a jumper on. We feel that discomfort of feeling cold, and we respond with the appropriate action. If we're tired, we sleep. If we're hungry, we eat. And we may not do that straight away. We might be able to push back on those feelings, but with that rising sense of urgency, eventually there comes a point where we have to take action. And that often happens with stress as well. So we might feel the stress kind of at lower levels, and as it gets kind of bigger and bigger and bigger, it eventually gets to this real point where we really notice that we're stressed, we're feeling quite overwhelmed, and that's the point at which maybe we really need to start making some changes and taking some action. So actually stress in itself, in that psychological sense, is doing its job if it makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable, even though that isn't a nice feeling. And also our bodies kind of help us as well. So it's not just our minds that feel that kind of overload, but it's our bodies that are kind of helping us deal with the challenges in front of us as well. So we might notice that our heart beats faster, which is going to help energize us and help us feel stronger and more resilient. We're going to have our breathing quickening, so we're getting more oxygen to our brain to help us think sharper and respond much quicker. Adrenaline's going to be pumping through our bodies, and the hormone oxytocin is released, which is sometimes called the cuddle hormone, it provokes us to be much more sociable. So it helps us to kind of seek social contact and connection, particularly if we're feeling overwhelmed. Then we can use that as an opportunity to talk about how we're feeling, to problem solve and get some comfort and connection from other people. Human beings are very much designed to be social creatures. That's how we thrive. So if we are seeking out connection with other people, that's going to be a route to dealing with particular challenges as well. So our bodies and our minds are doing what they can to help us respond appropriately to the challenge that's in front of us, and giving us the best chance of success as well, best chance of overcoming it. So although it's not a comfortable feeling, stress itself is not really the problem. It primes us to be much more productive and focused and to rise to the challenge. So therefore, where does the problem fall? Potentially, it's not stress itself that is causing us problems. Maybe it is our response to stress, whether we are actually fulfilling our needs, whether we're responding appropriately like we would do, putting a jumper on when we're cold. It's not necessarily that simple when it comes to stress, but let's have a think about the way that we're responding to our stress response. So some of the common pitfalls, I guess, some of the common ways that maybe we might not be responding effectively to our stress response is maybe that we avoid scenarios. We might give up. We might feel that actually I can't do this. This is too much. I can't take it, and therefore I will quit that course, give up the job. I'll say that I can't do that particular piece of work. It might be that we yeah, we just submit and bury our heads in the sand. And although that's not necessarily always a bad choice, sometimes that might be the right choice for us, we sometimes may miss out on opportunities for growth and success in that way. It might be that beyond the challenge, actually, there was an opportunity for something that felt good and felt meaningful. So sometimes by quitting and giving up, although it means that we take ourselves out of that stress response, it may not always be a brilliant response for us, or the most effective or successful response for us. Another thing that we might do is we might do nothing. We might carrying on, and despite our stress response and the rising sense of urgency there, we might actually not make any changes, so our situation stays the same, which is fine if the stress has an end in sight, that we know it's a short-term stress and eventually we'll come out the other end. But if actually there is no end in sight and we keep the situation just churning on the same and causing that stress to our system, that's when it becomes more toxic, when we're looking at more long-term stress. And another pitfall that we might find ourselves in is that we may compound the stress by really kind of tipping that imbalance within us even more so. And although we have competing priorities, we may just choose a couple and we focus and we push loads into a couple of those priorities, and we really neglect and forfeit some of the other really important needs and responsibilities that we have. And often I find that we neglect our internal needs, our need for rest, for time alone, for space, for recuperation, and for investing our time in the activities that we love and give meaning. So we often will forfeit some and bias our response to really kind of putting that energy into a couple of our priorities, which is fine. Again, if we have a short-term end in sight, you know, we've all heard of kind of overworking, working late, pulling all-nighters, and sometimes they work. But again, if we're looking at kind of the situation really lasting, then that isn't going to create the change that we need, and that stress will potentially linger. And again, it becomes more toxic when we're looking at more long-term stress. So short-term stress, helpful, is a helpful response. Long-term stress can be much more toxic. And we might find that then our physical and our mental health really starts to show signs of difficulty. We might notice that our sleep becomes quite disturbed. We may get lots of physical ailments. We might get poorly more easily. There are lots and lots of different things that we might see if we're looking at long-term stress. And say psychologically, we might look at being much more prone to developing particular psychological difficulties that can cause more stress in themselves. So really, what can we do therefore to kind of respond more effectively to stress? Well, I guess it's really listening carefully. So knowing that stress response actually is there to help us, listening more carefully to what are our needs, and looking at, are there ways to maybe diminish that stress and just take the edge off of it. Stress itself is really good. It creates that action. It helps us to be much more productive and smart and focused. So we don't want to obliterate it. We don't want to get rid of it from our systems. We just want to maybe take the edge off of it, because initially, as our stress levels goes up and our kind of arousal goes up, our performance also peaks as well. But eventually too much stress and our performance comes back down, and our well-being comes back down, and we get to a point maybe of feeling much more anxious, much more overwhelmed. So really, we just want to take the edge off of it. So listening to our stress response, problem solving, and trying to think of ways to elicit change, because as I say, kind of it really is that stress is a change agent, and looking at maybe checking some of your belief systems. So listen out for if you're telling yourself that you must do something, you have to do something, you should do something. Well, is that the truth? Because sometimes we might actually be putting additional pressures on ourselves that we don't need to do. So maybe checking out your belief systems, thinking about expressing your emotions when you're feeling that stress. Stress and all other emotions are designed to kind of rise, motivate, be actioned, and so to do something with it and then let it fall again. So talk about how you're feeling, problem solve, connect with other people, put boundaries in place, say no when you need to, delegate when you need to, boundary off certain bits of time that you know that you need to try and look after lots of the different competing priorities, take breaks if you need to, lots of self-care, because as I say, often our internal needs get a little bit neglected in our plight to kind of be seen as good and worthy and be accepted by the world around us. So just really listening to that stress response and taking appropriate action. Hopefully a few pointers that might help you kind of change your relationship with stress. Stress itself isn't bad, it's our response to it. So really kind of thinking outside the box, how can I do things differently? What support can I get in? Where can I push back? Yeah, I'll leave that over to you. I hope that helps you just a little bit, get you thinking about stress in